The chain rattled against Grace Remington's raw wrist as she tried to shift into a more comfortable position on the dirt floor. Moonlight spilled through the single, narrow basement window, her only connection to the outside world since Harlan Blackstone had dragged her from her father's stagecoach 3 weeks ago. The year was 1876, and in the untamed Colorado Territory, justice was as scarce as rain in August. Grace closed her eyes, trying to recall the feel of fresh air against her skin. At 22, she had been en route to Durango to meet her prospective husband, a man she'd never met, but who her father had assured her was respectable and wealthy. Instead, she'd become the captive of Blackstone, a man whose reputation for cruelty was well earned. The sound of boots on the wooden floor above made her heart pound. Blackstone had been drinking heavily tonight. She could hear the bottle hitting the table repeatedly. Each time he drank, his visits to the basement became more unpredictable, more frightening. Grace pushed herself back against the wall, the chains limiting her movement to a few feet in any direction. A door slammed somewhere above, and Grace released the breath she'd been holding. Perhaps he'd passed out early tonight. She tugged at the chain again, wincing as the metal cuff bit deeper into her already damaged skin. Outside, the wind whistled through the canyon that housed Blackstone's isolated ranch. Located 15 miles from Durango, the property sat tucked away where few travelers ventured. Her father would be searching for her, but in this vast country, would he ever find her? Grace's head jerked up at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Visitors were rare at Blackstone's ranch, especially after nightfall. She crept as close to the window as her chain would allow, straining to see. A lone rider dismounted, his silhouette tall against the moonlit sky. He moved with the confidence of a man who knew his way around horses and trouble. "Blackstone," the stranger called, his voice deep and commanding. Grace heard cursing from upstairs, followed by Blackstone's heavy footsteps across the floor. The front door creaked open. "Nighthawk, what brings you out this way?" Blackstone's words slurred slightly. "Business," the stranger Nighthawk replied. "Got a proposition for you. Come on in then. Could use the company." The door closed and Grace slumped back against the wall. Another of Blackstone's unsavory associates, no doubt. She wiped away a tear, refusing to give in to despair. Her mother hadn't raised her to surrender, even in the face of impossible odds. Minutes stretched into an hour. The voices above grew louder, angrier. Glass shattered. A chair scraped across the floor. Then came the unmistakable sound of a fist connecting with flesh, followed by a heavy thud. Grace tensed as footsteps moved toward the basement door. It was too early for Blackstone's usual visit, and his stride sounded different, steadier, purposeful. The door swung open, and boots descended the creaking wooden steps. The man who appeared before her wasn't Blackstone. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a black Stetson pulled low over his eyes. A leather vest covered his cotton shirt, and a gun belt hung low on his hips. When he spotted Grace in the corner, he stopped short. "Dear God," he whispered, removing his hat to reveal sandy brown hair. His blue eyes widened with shock as he took in her condition, the torn dress, the chains, the bruises. "Who are you?" Grace's voice cracked from disuse. "Name's Owen Nighthawk," he said, approaching slowly as if afraid she might bolt like a frightened deer. "Owen Nighthawk. Most folks just call me Nighthawk." "Is he dead?" Grace asked, nodding toward the ceiling. "Just unconscious, won't be for long." Owen knelt beside her, examining the heavy padlock securing her chains. "I knew Blackstone was a snake, but this—" His jaw clenched. "How long has he kept you here?" 3 weeks. He ambushed my father's stagecoach. I don't know what happened to my father." Grace's voice trembled. Owen's expression darkened. "We need to get you out of here. Now." He pulled a small leather pouch from his vest pocket. Learned a few tricks during my time with the cavalry. He extracted 2 slender metal tools and set to work on the lock. You were in the army, Grace asked, desperate for distraction from the pain in her wrists and the fear that Blackstone might appear at any moment. 7th Cavalry. 4 years. The lock clicked, and Owen smiled grimly. There we go. He gently removed the chain from her wrist, his touch light against her damaged skin. Can you walk? Grace nodded, though in truth she wasn't sure. Her legs felt weak from disuse and poor nutrition. Owen seemed to sense her uncertainty and offered his arm for support. She took it, grateful for his steadiness as she rose unsteadily to her feet. Blackstone has friends, Grace whispered. They'll come looking. Let them. Owen's voice was hard, but first we need to put miles between us and this place. He led her slowly up the stairs, pausing at the top to check that Blackstone remained unconscious. The man lay sprawled by the table, a broken bottle beside him. Owen guided Grace outside to where his horse waited. The cool night air felt like heaven against her skin after weeks in the basement's dank confines. The horse, a large, muscular buckskin, snorted softly as they approached. This is Renegade, Owen said, patting the animal's neck. Best horse I've ever had. He'll carry us both until we can get you something of your own. Before Grace could respond, a shot rang out. Owen shoved her behind him as Blackstone appeared in the doorway, a rifle in his hands. Thieving bastard, Blackstone roared, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. That's my property you're taking. Owen's draw was lightning fast. His revolver cleared its holster and fired in one smooth motion. Blackstone staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, then collapsed to his knees. She ain't property, Owen growled, keeping his gun trained on the wounded man. And if I ever see you again, I won't aim for your shoulder. He turned to Grace. Can you mount up if I help you? She nodded, and Owen holstered his weapon to boost her onto Renegade's back. He swung up behind her in one fluid motion, his arm circling her waist to steady her. Hold on, he murmured, and then they were galloping away from the ranch, the sound of Blackstone's curses fading behind them. Grace leaned back against Owen's solid chest, tears streaming down her face, tears of relief, of pain, of hope reborn. The moon lit their path as Renegade carried them deeper into the Colorado wilderness, away from her prison and toward an uncertain future. They rode for hours, following game trails and creek beds to obscure their trail. Owen kept them moving until the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Only then did he guide Renegade to a sheltered grove near a small stream. We'll rest here for a while, he said, dismounting before reaching up to help Grace down. Her legs buckled as her feet touched the ground, and Owen caught her before she could fall. Easy now. I'm sorry, Grace whispered, embarrassed by her weakness. Don't be. Owen's voice was gentle. You've been through hell. Anyone would be unsteady. He helped her to a flat rock beside the stream, then unsaddled Renegade and let the horse drink. From his saddlebags, he produced a canteen, some jerky, and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. It's not much, he said, offering her the canteen, but it'll keep us going until we reach somewhere safe. Grace drank deeply, the water tasting sweeter than the finest wine. When she lowered the canteen, she found Owen studying her with concern in his eyes. Thank you, she said, for freeing me, for risking your life. You didn't even know me. Owen sat beside her, offering the bundle, which turned out to contain cornbread. I wasn't looking to rescue anyone when I rode to Blackstone's place, he admitted. I was tracking a man who stole horses from a ranch near Durango. Thought Blackstone might have information. And instead you found me. Grace took a small bite of the cornbread, her stomach cramping after weeks of meager rations. Eat slowly, Owen advised. Your stomach needs to adjust. Grace nodded, nibbling more carefully. What will happen now? Blackstone has friends, dangerous men. And I don't know if my father is alive or where to find him. First, we get you somewhere safe, get those wrists tended to. Owen's gaze dropped to her raw skin. Then we'll figure out the rest. I know people in Durango, good people who can help. Durango, Grace repeated. That's where I was headed when Blackstone attacked our stage. My father arranged a marriage for me there. She looked down at her torn, filthy dress and laughed bitterly. I doubt my intended husband would want me now. Owen frowned. Any man worth marrying would care more about what you've survived than what was done to you. His words warmed something in Grace that had grown cold during her captivity. She studied him in the growing light, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the kindness in his blue eyes that belied the dangerous competence he'd displayed with Blackstone. How did you learn to pick locks? She asked. A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. My pa was a locksmith before he took up ranching, taught me the trade when I was just a boy, said you never know when a skill might come in handy. He glanced at her freed wrists. Guess he was right. They rested for 2 hours, long enough for Grace to regain some strength, but not so long that Blackstone's potential allies might catch up to them. Owen helped her back onto Renegade, and they continued their journey, keeping to the less traveled paths. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge that offered a view of a small homestead nestled in a green valley below. My friend Daniel lives there with his wife, Sarah, Owen explained. They're good people. Sarah was a nurse during the war. She'll know how to treat your wounds properly. Grace felt a rush of gratitude mixed with apprehension. Will they want to get involved? Blackstone isn't the kind to forgive and forget. Daniel owes me his life, Owen said simply. And they both hate bullies. They'll help. As they approached the homestead, a man emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. When he recognized Owen, he lowered the weapon and waved. Nighthawk, wasn't expecting you, Daniel called, then froze when he noticed Grace. What's happened? Owen dismounted and helped Grace down before briefly explaining the situation. Daniel's friendly face grew grim as he listened. Sarah, he shouted toward the house. We need you. A slender woman with auburn hair hurried from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Grace. Oh, you poor dear, she said, immediately taking charge. Come inside. Let's get you cleaned up and see to those wrists. Grace glanced back at Owen, suddenly reluctant to leave his side. Go on, he encouraged. You're safe here. I'll be right outside talking with Daniel. Sarah led Grace into the modest but clean cabin and straight to a wooden tub in a small room off the kitchen. I'll heat water for a bath, she said, her manner brisk but kind. And find you some clean clothes. You look to be about my size. While the water heated, Sarah examined Grace's wrists, cleaning them with a solution that stung but smelled medicinal. These will heal, she assured Grace. But you'll likely have scars. She paused, her eyes gentle. Did he hurt you in other ways? Grace understood what she was asking. He threatened to, many times, but always said he was saving me for something. I think he was waiting for someone specific to arrive, though I don't know who. Relief crossed Sarah's face. Thank God for small mercies. She helped Grace out of her filthy dress. Let's get you clean, then fed. Everything seems better after a bath and a hot meal. The bath was heaven. Grace soaked until the water cooled, scrubbing away weeks of grime and fear. Sarah provided a simple cotton dress, slightly large but clean and whole, and brushed Grace's long auburn hair until it shone. By the time they emerged from the bathing room, the aroma of cooking filled the cabin. Daniel and Owen sat at the table, heads together in serious conversation. Both men stood when Grace appeared. Owen's eyes widened slightly, and something in his expression made Grace's cheeks warm. Clean and dressed in proper clothing, with her hair neatly arranged, she felt human again and suddenly very aware of herself as a woman. "You look better," Owen said, then winced at his own words. "I mean, you look like herself again, I'd imagine," Daniel supplied, saving Owen from his awkward attempt at a compliment. "Sit down, Miss Remington. Sarah's stew is famous in these parts." Throughout the meal, Grace noted how Owen's gaze frequently returned to her, and how quickly he looked away when she caught him watching. Despite everything, she found herself wondering about this quiet, competent man who had risked his life to save a stranger. After dinner, while Sarah cleared the dishes, Daniel spread a map on the table. "Blackstone's got connections with a gang that works these territories," he explained, tracing a finger along the map. "They run stolen horses and cattle through here, sometimes worse. If he puts the word out about you two, you'll have trouble traveling the main roads." "What about her father?" Owen asked. "You hear anything about a stagecoach robbery 3 weeks back?" Daniel nodded grimly. "There was one on the Silver Creek Road. Driver killed, one passenger wounded and left for dead, another taken." He looked at Grace. "That was you." "My father was with me," Grace said, her voice tight. "The wounded passenger, do you know what happened to him?" "Taken to Durango. Survived last I heard, but that's all I know." Hope surged in Grace's heart. "He's alive." "My father's alive. Sounds likely," Daniel said. "But Durango's not safe for you right now. Blackstone's got men there. And the man you were traveling to marry, Jonathan Miller, he's been asking questions all over town about the missing stage passenger." "Jonathan's looking for me." Grace wasn't sure how she felt about that. She'd never met her intended husband, knew him only through her father's descriptions and a single, formally worded letter proposing marriage. "He's offering a reward," Daniel confirmed. "But so is Blackstone, though not officially. Word in town is he's promised $100 to anyone who brings him information about a stolen property, a woman matching your description." Owen's jaw tightened. "Then we need to avoid Durango for now." He turned to Grace. "I know this complicates things. You want to reach your father and your fiancé is there too, but it's too dangerous." "I understand," Grace said, though disappointment weighed heavy in her chest. "I have a cabin," Owen said after a moment of thought, "up in the high country. It's isolated, hard to find if you don't know it's there. We could lay low there while I send word to your father through channels Blackstone won't be watching." Daniel nodded approvingly. "That's smart. Sarah can send a message through her cousin. She works at the hotel in Durango." Very discreet woman. Grace looked from one man to the other. "You do all this for me. You barely know me." "What Blackstone did, what he's still trying to do, it ain't right," Owen said simply. "Besides, I started this when I took you from that basement. I aim to see it through." They spent the night at Daniel and Sarah's homestead, Grace in the small guest room and Owen on a pallet by the fire. Before dawn, Sarah packed them food and supplies, including proper clothing for Grace and a small revolver. "Every woman should know how to protect herself out here," Sarah insisted, showing Grace how to load and fire the weapon. Daniel provided a second horse, a steady mare named Willow, and by sunrise, they were on their way. They traveled north and west into increasingly rugged country. Owen led them through narrow canyons and across high meadows, always alert, frequently doubling back or taking unexpected turns. "Are we being followed?" Grace asked as they paused to rest the horses near a small spring. "Not yet," Owen replied, scanning the horizon. "But better cautious than caught." He offered her the canteen. "How are you holding up? We can rest longer if you need." Grace shook her head. "I'm stronger than I look." She smiled slightly. "Though I admit I'll be glad to reach this cabin of yours." A roof and walls sound wonderful right now. Owen's cabin appeared before them late that afternoon, nestled against a mountainside and partially obscured by pines. It was small but solidly built, with a corral for the horses and a stream nearby. "It's not much," Owen said as he helped her dismount. "Built it myself 3 years ago. Come up here when I need to think, or when the towns get too crowded for my taste." Inside was simple but comfortable: a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, cupboards for provisions, and a bed in the corner. A bearskin rug covered part of the plank floor. Owen looked suddenly self-conscious. "You take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." Grace realized with a jolt that they would be alone here, possibly for days or even weeks. The propriety her father had instilled in her ward with practical necessity. "Thank you," she said simply. As Owen started a fire and prepared a meal from their provisions, Grace explored the cabin. Despite its simplicity, it showed signs of a man who appreciated order and craftsmanship. The furniture was handmade but well constructed, the tools hanging on the wall were clean and maintained, and a small bookshelf held a dozen well-worn volumes. "You read," she observed, running her fingers along the spines. "Shakespeare, Thoreau, a volume of Tennyson's poetry." Owen glanced up from the fire. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She believed education shouldn't stop just because we lived far from any school." A shadow crossed his face. "She died when I was 15. Fever took her, but I kept reading." "Feels like she's still teaching me that way." Grace selected the Tennyson. "May I?" "Help yourself. Not much entertainment up here besides books and watching the eagles." As darkness fell outside, they shared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and biscuits Sarah had packed. The food was plain but satisfying, and the cabin grew warm and cozy as the fire blazed. "Tomorrow I'll show you the area," Owen said as he cleared their plates. "There's places to hide if trouble comes, and I'll teach you more about that revolver Sarah gave you." "Do you really think Blackstone will find us here?" Owen considered the question. "It's unlikely, but I've stayed alive this long by preparing for unlikely things." He settled into a chair across from her. "Tell me about your father. What kind of man arranges a marriage for his daughter in these times?" Grace wasn't sure if she detected criticism in his tone. "My father believes in tradition. After my mother died 2 years ago, he became convinced I needed a husband's protection. Jonathan Miller is the son of his business partner, supposedly respectable, well established in Durango." She traced a pattern on the wooden table. "I agreed because it seemed to comfort my father, and because I had few other prospects in Boston." "Boston," Owen repeated. "Long way from home." "Yes." Father expanded his shipping business to include investments in silver mines near Durango. This was to be his first visit to check on his investment. He thought it a perfect opportunity to finalize my marriage arrangements. Grace laughed softly. "I doubt he anticipated outlaws." "Few do until they meet them." Owen poured coffee for them both. "And this Jonathan Miller you're content to marry a man you've never met?" "Content," Grace considered the word. "I was resigned to it. Now, I'm not sure of anything anymore." Owen nodded, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Get some rest. Dawn comes early in the mountains." Grace took the bed, wrapped in a quilt that smelled of pine and smoke, while Owen made a pallet near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Blackstone's basement, felt the chains on her wrists. Twice she woke gasping, certain she was back in captivity. The second time she found Owen awake, watching her with concern from his place by the dying fire. "Bad dreams?" he asked softly. Grace nodded, drawing the quilt tighter around herself. "I keep thinking I'm back there, that this is the dream and I'll wake up in chains." Owen rose and added wood to the fire, stirring it back to life. After the war, I had dreams like that, still do sometimes. He remained by the fire, giving her space. It helps to remind yourself what's real. Feel the blanket in your hands. Listen to the wind in the pines. Count your breaths. Grace followed his advice, focusing on the texture of the quilt, the sound of the wind, the steady rhythm of her own breathing. Gradually, her racing heart slowed. "Thank you," she whispered. Owen nodded, returning to his pallet. "Try to sleep. I'm right here if the dreams come back." Strangely comforted by his presence, Grace drifted back to sleep. This time, no nightmares disturbed her rest. The next morning, Owen showed her the surrounding area, the best routes to water, places to hide if strangers approached, landmarks to help her find her way back to the cabin if she became lost. "You're teaching me as if I'll be here alone," Grace observed as they paused by a rock outcropping that offered a view of the valley below. "Just being thorough," Owen replied, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't telling her everything. They spent the afternoon practicing with the revolver. Grace proved a quick study, her natural coordination making up for her lack of experience. By sunset, she could hit a can placed on a stump with reasonable consistency. "Not bad for a Boston lady," Owen remarked, genuine approval in his voice. "A few more days of practice, and you'll be downright dangerous." Grace smiled, pleased by his praise. "My father would be scandalized. He believes ladies should leave matters of protection entirely to men. With respect to your father, out here that kind of thinking gets people killed." Owen holstered his own weapon. Everyone should know how to defend themselves, man or woman. As they walked back to the cabin, Grace found herself studying Owen's profile against the setting sun. In the 3 days since her rescue, she'd learned little about him beyond the basics: former cavalry, skilled with horses and guns, educated despite his frontier life. He revealed himself in small, practical ways: his gentle treatment of the horses, his respect for her abilities, the books he read by firelight. "Why did you go to Blackstone's ranch that night?" she asked suddenly. Owen glanced at her, then back at the path. "Told you." "Looking for information on horse thieves." "Yes, but why you? Are you a lawman?" He laughed shortly. "No, madam, just a man who sometimes does jobs others won't take." At her questioning look, he elaborated. "Tracking, mostly, finding people or animals that don't want to be found. The law around here is stretched thin. When something needs doing, folks sometimes come to me. A bounty hunter, sometimes, when the cause is right." They reached the cabin and Owen held the door for her. "I don't take just any job that pays. I have standards." Over the next week, they settled into a routine. Mornings were spent on practical matters: hunting, maintaining the cabin, caring for the horses. Afternoons, Owen continued Grace's shooting lessons, adding instruction in basic survival skills. Evenings were passed in conversation or reading by the fire, Owen slowly revealing more of himself as Grace shared stories of her life in Boston. Grace found herself watching him when he wasn't looking: the confident way he moved, the surprising gentleness of his hands when tending a wound on Willow's leg, the rare but transformative smile that changed his entire face. Without quite realizing it, she began to measure her days by his presence: safer when he was near, emptier when he was hunting or scouting the area. On their 9th day at the cabin, Owen returned from checking traps with news. "Riders in the valley," he reported, his expression grave. "3 men moving slow, looking at the ground a lot." "Tracking us?" Grace asked, her throat tightening with fear, maybe, hard to tell from a distance. Owen began gathering supplies. "I'm going to get a closer look. You stay here, out of sight." "Alone." The word came out more plaintively than Grace intended. Owen paused, studying her face. "I won't be gone long. Remember what I taught you. Stay inside. Keep the bar across the door. Use the revolver if anyone but me tries to enter." After he left, Grace paced the small cabin, jumping at every sound from the forest. She kept the revolver close, checking repeatedly that it was loaded. When darkness fell with no sign of Owen, her anxiety increased. She barred the door as instructed and sat by the fire, straining to hear hoofbeats over the wind that had risen during the evening. Near midnight, a scratching at the door made her jump to her feet, gun in hand. "Grace," Owen's voice called softly. "It's me." She rushed to remove the bar, relief flooding her as Owen slipped inside. The relief vanished when she saw the blood soaking his left sleeve. "You're hurt," she gasped. "It's nothing. Bullet grazed me." Despite his dismissive words, Owen's face was pale, his movements stiff. Grace led him to a chair, her fear for his safety overriding her natural reserve. "Let me see." Owen submitted to her examination, wincing as she cut away the bloody sleeve to reveal a deep furrow across his upper arm. "This is more than a graze," she scolded, gathering clean cloths and water. "What happened?" "Blackstone's men," Owen confirmed grimly. "3 of them. They found our trail from Daniel's place. I watched them long enough to be sure, then tried to lead them away from here." He hissed as Grace cleaned the wound. 2 followed my false trail. The 3rd got suspicious, doubled back. We surprised each other on the ridge. "You shot him?" Grace asked, working to keep her hands steady. "He shot first. I returned fire." Owen's eyes met hers. "He won't be reporting back to Blackstone." Grace absorbed this information as she continued treating the wound. A man was dead. Owen had killed to protect them, to protect her. The realization should have horrified her, but all she felt was a profound gratitude that it was Owen sitting before her, wounded but alive. "The others will come looking when their friend doesn't return," she said, wrapping a clean bandage around his arm. "Not tonight. I left the body where it would take time to find." Owen flexed his arm carefully. "But we should be ready to move by dawn." "Move where? If they found our trail once?" "I know a place, higher up, harder to reach." Owen caught her hand as she finished securing the bandage. "Grace, I'm sorry. I hoped we'd have more time before trouble found us." His touch sent warmth spreading up her arm. "You have nothing to apologize for. You've risked everything for me, a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Owen said quietly. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, the gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. For a long moment, they remained connected by that simple touch, something unspoken passing between them. Then Owen cleared his throat and released her hand. "We should rest while we can," he said, rising from the chair. "Dawn will be here before we know it." They left at first light, taking only what they could carry on horseback. Owen led them up a steep, barely visible trail that switchbacked up the mountainside. By mid-morning, they reached their destination, a natural cave set into the cliff face, hidden by a stand of pines. "Discovered this place years ago, tracking a mountain lion," Owen explained as they dismounted. "Not as comfortable as the cabin, but almost impossible to find unless you know it's here." The cave extended deeper than Grace expected, the interior surprisingly dry. Owen built a small, nearly smokeless fire near the entrance, positioning it so the light wouldn't be visible from below. They arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining the same propriety they'd established at the cabin. For 3 days, they remained in hiding. Owen ventured out only to hunt and check for signs of pursuit. On the 4th day, he returned with news. Riders headed back down the valley, 4 of them. His expression was thoughtful. "They searched the cabin, but they're giving up. For now." "So we're safe?" Grace asked hopefully. "Safer," Owen qualified, "but we need a more permanent solution. You need to reunite with your father, decide about this Jonathan Miller." Something in his voice changed when he mentioned her fiancé's name. Hiding in the mountains isn't a life. What do you suggest? Owen sat beside her, spreading a crude map he'd drawn on a piece of leather. There's a settlement 3 days' ride from here. Silverdale. Small, but it has a telegraph office. From there, I can send messages to Durango, find out about your father, maybe arrange a meeting somewhere Blackstone's men won't be watching. And you? What will you do after I'm reunited with my father? Owen didn't meet her eyes. What I always do. Move on. Find the next job. The thought of Owen simply walking away created an unexpected ache in Grace's chest. Over the past 2 weeks, he had become more than her rescuer. He was her confidant, her teacher, perhaps her friend. The idea of never seeing him again felt wrong somehow, like losing something precious before fully recognizing its value. They set out for Silverdale the next morning, following game trails and old Indian paths to avoid the more traveled routes where Blackstone's men might be watching. The journey was challenging but not unpleasant. Spring had fully arrived in the high country, wildflowers carpeting the meadows they crossed, the air sweet with pine and new growth. At night, they camped beneath the stars, their conversations growing increasingly personal around the small fires Owen built. Grace learned about Owen's childhood on a small ranch outside Santa Fe, his time in the cavalry during the final years of the war, his decision to live by his own code rather than settle into one place or profession. In turn, she told him about her sheltered upbringing in Boston, her mother's death from consumption, her father's gradual withdrawal into his business affairs, leaving Grace increasingly isolated in their grand but empty house. Sometimes I think that's why I agreed to this arranged marriage so easily, she confessed on their second night on the trail. Not just to please my father, but because I was lonely. Even marriage to a stranger seemed better than that house with all its silence. Owen poked at the fire with a stick. And now, after everything that's happened, would you still choose that path? Grace considered the question seriously. I don't know. 3 weeks ago, I thought I understood the world and my place in it. Now everything looks different. She gazed up at the vast sweep of stars overhead. I feel different. Different how? Stronger. Less afraid. She smiled across the fire at him. You've shown me I can survive things I never imagined facing. That changes a person. Owen's expression softened. You were always strong, Grace. You survived Blackstone's basement for 3 weeks without breaking. That wasn't my doing. His praise warmed her more than the fire. They fell silent, but it was a comfortable silence filled with unspoken understanding. They reached Silverdale late on the 3rd day, a cluster of buildings surrounded by smaller homesteads, nestled in a valley between 2 mountain ridges. Owen suggested they approach cautiously, uncertain if news of Blackstone's search had reached this far. Wait here, he said, leaving Grace with the horses in a grove of trees outside town. I'll make sure it's safe before we go in together. Grace watched him ride toward the settlement, his tall figure growing smaller with distance. While she waited, she braided her hair and smoothed her dress as best she could, suddenly conscious of her appearance after days on the trail. Owen returned an hour later, his expression relieved. No sign of trouble. No wanted posters, no gossip about a missing woman. We should be safe here, at least for a night or two. Silverdale's only hotel was a simple 2-story building with 6 rooms for rent. The proprietress, Mrs. Winters, raised an eyebrow at the unmarried couple requesting lodging but asked no questions when Owen paid for 2 separate rooms in advance. Dining rooms through there, she said, handing them each a key. Cook serves until 8. Bathhouse is out back, extra charge, but worth it after a long ride. Her shrewd eyes took in their trail-worn appearance. General store closes at 6 if you're needing supplies." They parted in the hallway, Owen to send telegrams, Grace to enjoy the luxury of a proper bath. The hot water was heavenly after days of washing in cold streams, and the clean dress Sarah had packed for her, saved for just such an occasion, made her feel almost civilized again. When she entered the dining room, she found Owen already seated at a corner table. He stood as she approached, his eyes widening slightly. The bath and fresh clothes had transformed her, returning her to something closer to the Boston lady who had set out for Durango weeks ago. "You look—" Owen seemed at a loss for words. "Clean," Grace supplied with a smile, taking the seat he held for her. "Beautiful," he said quietly, returning to his own chair. The unexpected compliment brought heat to Grace's cheeks. Before she could respond, a waitress appeared to take their orders, breaking the moment. Over a dinner of surprisingly good beef stew and fresh bread, Owen reported on his inquiries, sent telegrams to Daniel and to the sheriff in Durango, asked about your father without using names that might alert Blackstone's contacts. He took a sip of coffee. "Should have answers by morning." "And then what?" Grace asked. "Depends on the replies. If your father's well enough to travel, we might arrange to meet him somewhere safe. If not—" Owen hesitated. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it." After dinner, they lingered over coffee, reluctant to separate after 2 weeks of constant companionship. When they finally stood to retire for the night, Owen walked Grace to her door. "Sleep well," he said, his voice lower than usual. "First real bed in a while." "You too." Grace hesitated, then impulsively reached for his hand, squeezing it briefly. "Thank you, Owen, for everything." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite identify. He returned the pressure of her hand before releasing it. "Good night, Grace." In her room, Grace lay awake long after the sounds of the small hotel quieted. Her thoughts kept returning to Owen, his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way his rare smiles transformed his face. When had he become so important to her? And what would happen when they reached Durango and her father? Would Owen simply disappear from her life? The thought created a hollow feeling in her chest that kept her awake until the first hints of dawn lightened the sky outside her window. Morning brought answers in the form of telegraph replies. Owen found Grace at breakfast and slid 2 pieces of paper across the table to her. "Your father's alive," he said without preamble. "Recovering at the Silver Palace Hotel in Durango. Daniel's contact confirms he's well guarded. Seems your fiancé hired men to protect him after the stage robbery." Grace scanned the telegrams, relief flooding through her. "Thank God. Does it say anything about his condition?" "Shot in the side during the robbery. Serious but not fatal." "He's been asking about you. And Blackstone. His men, still looking, according to Daniel. They've been watching the roads to Durango." Owen stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "We need to get you to your father without Blackstone's men spotting us. And we need to make sure Jonathan Miller is who he claims to be." Grace looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Owen leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Think about it. Blackstone attacked your stage specifically. He was waiting for it. He kept you alive, said he was saving you for someone. What if that someone was in Durango? What if they arranged the whole thing, Jonathan?" Grace shook her head. "But he's been searching for me, protecting my father. So it appears. And maybe that's exactly what he's doing. But I've learned to question convenient stories." Owen's expression was serious. "Before I deliver you to Durango, I want to be certain I'm not handing you from one danger to another." Grace considered his words. The idea that Jonathan might be connected to her abduction seemed far-fetched, yet Owen's caution had kept them alive this far. "What do you suggest?" "We send another telegram. To your father directly this time. Ask questions only he would know the answers to. See what comes back." Owen handed her a blank telegraph form, "and we arrange a meeting place that isn't Durango." Grace wrote a brief message, including personal details about her mother's favorite poem, and the name of her childhood pony, information a stranger couldn't possibly know. They spent the day in Silverdale waiting for a reply, purchasing supplies and gathering information about the trails ahead. By evening, a response arrived that put Grace's fears to rest. "It's him," she confirmed, reading the message. "These are things only my father would know." Owen nodded, satisfied. "He agrees to meet us at Willow Creek in 3 days, says he'll come alone with just Jonathan and 2 trusted men." "Willow Creek?" Grace asked. "Small settlement about halfway between here and Durango. Neutral ground and off the main roads Blackstone's men are watching." Owen hesitated. "Grace, once you're with your father and Jonathan, my job will be done." The statement hung between them, laden with unspoken emotion. Grace studied Owen's face, searching for some indication of what he was feeling. "Is that what this has been to you? A job?" she asked softly. Owen's gaze met hers, intense and conflicted. "You know it's been more than that." Before he could elaborate, the hotel owner appeared with fresh coffee, interrupting the moment. By the time they were alone again, the connection had been broken, Owen's expression once more carefully neutral. "We should leave at first light," he said. "Long ride to Willow Creek." The journey to Willow Creek took them through increasingly populated areas, requiring greater caution. They avoided the main trails, sometimes riding miles out of their way to circumvent small settlements where news of Blackstone's search might have spread. Owen remained vigilant, his hand never far from his revolver, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. On the evening before they were to meet her father, they camped in a secluded glade near a small stream. As Grace prepared their simple meal, she found herself watching Owen care for the horses, memorizing the way he moved, the set of his shoulders, the rare moments when his guard dropped and a genuine smile lightened his features. Tomorrow she would see her father again. Meet Jonathan Miller. Return to the life that had been planned for her before Blackstone's intervention. The thought should have brought only relief, but instead it filled her with a strange melancholy. "You're quiet tonight," Owen observed as they ate. Grace set down her plate. "I'm thinking about tomorrow." "About what happens after?" Owen nodded, his expression guarded. "Your father will be relieved to see you safe, and your fiancé—" "A man I've never met," Grace reminded him. "A stranger, really. A respectable businessman, according to your father. The kind of man who can provide security, position." Owen's tone was carefully neutral. "The kind of life you were raised to expect. And what about you? What will you do after tomorrow?" Owen poked at the fire, avoiding her gaze. "Move on. There's always work for a man with my skills." "Just like that? After everything we've been through?" Grace couldn't keep the hurt from her voice. Owen looked up then, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "What would you have me do, Grace? Stay and watch you marry another man? Build a life with someone your father chose for you before you ever met either of us?" The raw emotion in his voice startled her. "Owen, I've got nothing to offer a woman like you," he continued, the words seeming to burst from him after weeks of restraint. "No home but a cabin in the wilderness. No profession but tracking and hunting. No future that any father would consider suitable for his daughter. Shouldn't that be my decision?" Grace moved around the fire to sit beside him. "These past weeks have changed me, Owen. I'm not the same sheltered girl who left Boston. I've seen both the worst and the best of what men can be. I've learned what truly matters." "And what's that?" he asked, his voice low. "Courage, honor, kindness." She reached for his hand, her heart pounding. "The man, not his position or possessions." Owen's fingers tightened around hers. "Your father would never approve. Perhaps not immediately, but he loves me. He wants my happiness above all." Grace hesitated, then added softly, "And I don't believe I could be happy with Jonathan Miller. Not now. Not after knowing you." The confession hung in the air between them, changing everything. Owen's expression shifted from restraint to wonder, then to a determination that made her breath catch. "Grace," he murmured, lifting his free hand to touch her cheek. "I've been fighting this since the day I found you, telling myself it was wrong to feel this way about a woman promised to another man, a woman who deserves far better than what I can provide." "I think I should decide what I deserve," Grace whispered, leaning into his touch. Owen's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, seeking permission. Grace answered by closing the distance between them, pressing her mouth to his in a kiss that began hesitantly but quickly deepened, as weeks of unacknowledged longing broke free. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Grace felt as though she'd finally found her true home, not in Boston or Durango, but here, with this man who had risked everything to save her and asked nothing in return. When they finally parted, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Your father arrives tomorrow," he reminded her. "Nothing is settled yet." "My heart is," Grace replied simply. "The rest will follow." They slept that night beneath the stars, closer than propriety would allow, but with a newfound understanding between them. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them together. Willow Creek proved to be little more than a trading post, a livery stable, and a handful of buildings clustered around a creek crossing. Owen and Grace arrived early, checking the area thoroughly before taking positions where they could observe anyone approaching from the Durango road. "Your father should arrive within the hour," Owen said, consulting his pocket watch. "Remember, stay hidden until I'm certain it's safe." Grace nodded, though the idea of remaining hidden while Owen potentially faced danger alone troubled her. "Be careful. If Blackstone somehow learned of this meeting." "I'll be fine." Owen squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Just a few more hours and this will all be over." A dust cloud on the eastern trail announced the approach of riders. Owen positioned himself behind a large boulder, rifle ready, while Grace remained concealed in a stand of willows nearby. 4 horsemen came into view, an older man with gray hair, a younger, well-dressed gentleman, and 2 obvious hired guns. Grace's heart leaped at the sight of her father. Even at a distance, she could see he was thinner, his posture slightly stooped as if in pain, but unmistakably alive. Owen watched the new arrivals carefully, noting their open approach and relaxed posture. After satisfying himself that no additional riders lurked out of sight, he stepped into the open, rifle held non-threateningly at his side. "Mr. Remington," he called. The older man reined in his horse. "I am. You must be Nighthawk." Owen nodded. "Show me the letter." Mr. Remington reached into his coat and produced an envelope, the one Grace had given Owen the previous day, containing a message only her father would recognize. "Where is my daughter?" Mr. Remington asked, his voice tight with emotion. Owen turned toward the willows and nodded. Grace emerged from hiding, her heart pounding as she rushed toward her father. He dismounted awkwardly, favoring his left side, and opened his arms to her. "Grace, my dear girl," his voice broke as he embraced her. "I feared the worst. When the stage was attacked, I'm safe, father," Grace assured him, clinging to him while trying to be gentle with his injury. "Thanks to Owen." The younger man, Jonathan Miller, she presumed, dismounted and approached. Handsome in a conventional way, with neatly trimmed dark hair and expensive clothing, he offered a formal bow. "Miss Remington, words cannot express my relief at seeing you unharmed." Grace stepped back from her father's embrace to acknowledge him. "Mr. Miller." Thank you for caring for my father during his recovery. The least I could do under the circumstances." Jonathan's gaze flickered to Owen, who remained a few paces away, watchful. "And we have this gentleman to thank for your rescue, I understand." "Yes." Grace moved to stand beside Owen. "Father, Mr. Miller, this is Owen Nighthawk. He saved my life at great risk to his own." Mr. Remington extended his hand to Owen. "Sir, I am forever in your debt. Name your reward. Anything within my power to give is yours." Owen shook the offered hand. "No reward necessary, Mr. Remington. Just seeing Grace safely return to her family is enough." "Nonsense. Such bravery must be acknowledged." Mr. Remington turned to Jonathan. "Wouldn't you agree, Jonathan?" Miller's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Absolutely. Perhaps a monetary token of our appreciation." "I'm sure Mr. Nighthawk has expenses to cover." Something in Miller's tone, a subtle condescension, raised Grace's hackles. She glanced at Owen and saw his jaw tighten briefly before he replied. "As I said, no reward necessary." Owen's voice was polite but firm. "However, I would appreciate knowing what's being done about Harlan Blackstone. He's still a danger to Grace." Mr. Remington's expression darkened. "The local sheriff has been less than helpful. Claims there's insufficient evidence linking Blackstone to the stagecoach robbery, despite my daughter's testimony." "Blackstone has connections in Durango," Jonathan added. "But we've taken precautions. The hotel is well guarded, and once we return to Boston, he'll be of no further concern." "Boston," Grace repeated, her stomach tightening. "So soon?" "Of course, my dear," her father said. "As soon as you've recovered from your ordeal. There's nothing to keep us in this uncivilized territory now that my business is concluded." "And our wedding can proceed as planned," Jonathan added, his tone suggesting the matter was settled. "Perhaps in June. A small ceremony given the circumstances." Grace felt Owen stiffen beside her, though his expression remained carefully neutral. She realized with sudden clarity that her father and Jonathan had simply assumed she would slip back into their plans as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't changed. "Father," she began carefully, "much has happened. I think we should discuss." "There will be time for discussions once we're safely back in Durango," Mr. Remington interrupted. "For now, let us focus on the journey. These hills are still dangerous." He turned to Owen. "Will you accompany us, Mr. Nighthawk? I would feel safer with a man of your capabilities alongside us." Before Owen could respond, one of the hired guns who had been scanning the surrounding hills called out, "Riders coming, fast from the west." Owen's reaction was immediate. "Get to cover," he ordered, gesturing toward a rocky outcropping nearby. "Grace, stay with your father." 5 horsemen appeared around the bend in the trail, riding hard. Even at a distance, Grace recognized Blackstone at their head, his distinctive black hat and bulky frame unmistakable. "Blackstone," she whispered, fear and anger mingling in her voice. "How did he find us?" Jonathan demanded as they scrambled for the cover of the rocks. Owen positioned himself at the edge of their shelter, rifle ready. "Question for later. Right now, we need to hold them off until help arrives." "Help?" Mr. Remington asked. "Friends from Silverdale. I arranged a backup plan." Owen glanced at the 2 hired guns. "Can your men shoot?" The taller of the 2 men nodded grimly. "That's what you're paying us for, sir," he said to Mr. Remington. Blackstone and his men reined in their horses about 100 yards away, spreading out to present less of a target. Blackstone himself rode forward another 20 yards before calling out, "Remington, I know you're there. All I want is the girl. Give her to me and the rest of you can ride away." "Like hell," Owen muttered, then raised his voice. "Blackstone, you're outnumbered and outgunned. Ride away while you still can." Blackstone laughed, the sound carrying across the open ground. Nighthawk, should have known you'd be here. Tell me, does Remington know what kind of man he's dealing with? A killer for hire, a drifter with no home and no future. Grace saw her father glance at Owen with new wariness. Is what he says true? Mr. Remington asked quietly. Some of it, Owen admitted, keeping his eyes on Blackstone. I've killed men, but never without cause, and I've never sold my gun to anyone who didn't deserve my help. Enough talk, Blackstone shouted. Last chance, Remington. The girl or we start shooting. Mr. Remington stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. She is my daughter, you monster. You'll never touch her again. Blackstone's response was a signal to his men, who opened fire. Bullets whined off the rocks as everyone ducked lower. Owen returned fire with cool precision, dropping one of Blackstone's men from his saddle. The hired guards joined in, creating enough suppressive fire to keep Blackstone's remaining men pinned behind their horses. In the midst of the gunfight, Grace noticed Jonathan Miller edging away from the group, moving deeper into the rocks as if seeking better protection. Something about his movement struck her as odd, not simply seeking safety, but purposeful, as if he had a destination in mind. Owen, she called over the gunfire. Jonathan is, her warning came too late. Jonathan emerged from behind a boulder with a revolver in his hand, aimed directly at Owen's back. Drop the rifle, Nighthawk, he ordered, his voice no longer that of a refined businessman but cold and hard. Owen froze, then slowly lowered his weapon, turning to face the unexpected threat. Miller, working with Blackstone all along, Jonathan smiled thinly. Not exactly with him. Let's say we had a business arrangement that he failed to complete. Mr. Remington stared at Jonathan in shock. What is the meaning of this? Jonathan, what are you doing? Securing my investment, Charles. Jonathan kept the revolver trained on Owen while addressing Grace's father. Your daughter represents a considerable fortune, your shipping business, your mining interests. All to be signed over upon your death, which I had arranged to follow shortly after our wedding. You, Mr. Remington's face contorted with rage and disbelief. You arranged the stagecoach attack. You wanted me dead and my daughter captive. Blackstone was supposed to hold her until after our wedding, Jonathan confirmed coldly. A simple plan: rescue the grieving daughter from her kidnapper, complete the marriage, inherit everything when tragedy struck again. His gaze shifted to Grace. But then this interfering cowboy ruined everything. Grace felt sick with betrayal and horror. The man her father had chosen for her, the man she had agreed to marry sight unseen, had orchestrated her abduction and planned her father's murder. You won't get away with this, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Jonathan laughed. I already have. Once Nighthawk is dead and you're back in Blackstone's custody, we'll simply adjust the plan. Perhaps a heroic but failed rescue attempt on my part, your father's death from his wounds. The specifics can be arranged. Outside their rocky shelter, the gunfire had ceased. Blackstone called out, Miller, what's the delay? Just tying up loose ends, Jonathan replied, his finger tightening on the trigger as he aimed at Owen's chest. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Jonathan's gun. The would-be groom staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as a red stain bloomed on his shirt front. He collapsed to the ground, the unfired revolver falling from his grasp. Grace lowered Sarah's small revolver, her hand shaking but her expression resolute. You forgot Owen taught me to shoot, she said to Jonathan's lifeless form. Owen moved quickly to retrieve Jonathan's weapon, then pulled Grace behind the cover of the rocks as Blackstone's men, hearing the shot, renewed their attack. Are you all right? He asked, his eyes searching her face. Grace nodded, still processing what she had done. He was going to kill you. Kill my father? I couldn't let that happen. Mr. Remington crawled to their position, his face ashen. "Grace, I am so sorry. I brought that monster into our lives. I nearly delivered you to him." "You couldn't have known, Father," Grace assured him, though the shock of Jonathan's betrayal still reverberated through her. The distinctive sound of a cavalry bugle cut through the gunfire, followed by the thunder of approaching hooves. Owen smiled grimly. "Backup has arrived." A dozen mounted men in civilian clothes but moving with military precision crested the hill behind them, rifles raised. Their leader, a gray-haired man with a sergeant's bearing, called out to Blackstone's group. "Drop your weapons. You're surrounded." Blackstone and his remaining men, caught between Owen's position and the newcomers, hesitated only briefly before throwing down their guns. "Friends of yours?" Mr. Remington asked Owen as the armed riders rounded up the surrendering outlaws. "Former comrades from the cavalry," Owen confirmed. "Now working as security for the silver mines. I sent word from Silverdale, asked them to follow at a distance in case of trouble." As Blackstone was bound and placed on his horse, he glared at Owen with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over, Nighthawk. Not by a long shot." "It is for you," Owen replied evenly. "The stagecoach driver you killed was the sheriff's cousin. He'll be mighty interested to hear Miss Remington's testimony about her time in your basement." Blackstone's face paled slightly, but he maintained his defiant expression as he was led away with his men. The gray-haired leader of the reinforcements approached, dismounting to shake Owen's hand. "Cutting it close as usual, Nighthawk. Appreciate the help, Sergeant. Perfect timing." "Always happy to oblige a fellow veteran." The older man glanced at Jonathan's body. "What about him? Conspirator with Blackstone," Owen explained briefly. "Tried to shoot us in the back during the firefight." The sergeant nodded, asking no further questions. "We'll take the body to Durango with the prisoners. The sheriff can sort it all out." As the group prepared to depart, Mr. Remington drew Owen aside, his expression solemn. "Mr. Nighthawk, I owe you not only my daughter's life but my own as well. I misjudged you earlier, influenced by Blackstone's words and my own prejudices. Please accept my sincere apology." Owen nodded, accepting the older man's outstretched hand. "No apology needed, sir. You were concerned for your daughter's welfare. Any father would be." "Indeed." Mr. Remington glanced at Grace, who was speaking with one of the hired guards about retrieving their horses. "She's changed, stronger, more determined than I remember." "She was always strong," Owen said quietly. "She just needed the chance to discover it for herself." Mr. Remington studied Owen thoughtfully. "And the two of you, during these weeks together?" Owen met the older man's gaze directly. "I care for your daughter, Mr. Remington, more than I've cared for anyone, but I understand the differences in our situations, our backgrounds." "Differences?" Mr. Remington raised an eyebrow. "You mean that you're a frontiersman without formal education or social position, while my daughter was raised in Boston society?" "Yes, sir. Exactly that." To Owen's surprise, Mr. Remington laughed softly. "Mr. Nighthawk, I just watched my carefully selected, socially appropriate choice for a son-in-law reveal himself as a murderous schemer. Perhaps it's time I reconsidered my criteria." His expression grew serious again. "What matters is my daughter's happiness and safety. You've proven your ability to provide the latter. As for the former, that's for Grace to decide." Before Owen could respond, Grace joined them, her eyes moving uncertainly between the two men. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly," her father assured her. "Mr. Nighthawk and I were just discussing the future." He touched her cheek gently. "My dear, after today's revelations, I believe all our plans require reconsideration. Perhaps a return to Boston isn't what either of us truly wants." Grace's eyes widened with hope. "You mean?" I mean that life is shorter and more precious than I realized, until I nearly lost it and you." Mr. Remington smiled wryly. "My business associate in Durango has been suggesting I consider relocating permanently to oversee the mining operations. Perhaps it's time I took his advice." "But what about your shipping business in Boston, competently managed by partners who would be happy to buy my share, given the opportunity?" Mr. Remington glanced meaningfully at Owen. "Of course, such decisions needn't be made immediately. For now, we should return to Durango, rest, recover, and consider all options carefully." As they prepared to depart, Owen helped Grace mount her horse, their hands lingering together longer than necessary. "Your father seems to be reconsidering his position on appropriate suitors," Owen said quietly. Grace smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears of relief and hope. "He's a smart man. He knows what truly matters." She squeezed Owen's hand. "Ride with us to Durango." "All the way," Owen promised, then added more softly, "and beyond if you'll have me." The journey to Durango took 2 days, during which Grace watched her father and Owen develop an unexpected rapport. Mr. Remington, freed from Jonathan's deception, revealed a more adaptable nature than Grace had previously known, listening with genuine interest as Owen described the territories and opportunities of the Colorado frontier. In Durango, Blackstone and his men were jailed pending trial. Jonathan Miller's body was identified and his conspiracy exposed, and the Remingtons were welcomed as minor celebrities, the kidnapped daughter rescued. The father recovered from his wounds. Their ordeal finally ended. Owen maintained a respectful distance during their first days in town, calling formally at their hotel, but never presuming upon the intimacy that had developed during their time in the wilderness. Grace understood his caution, but found herself missing the easy companionship they had shared, the quiet conversations by firelight, the sense of partnership that had grown between them. A week after their arrival in Durango, Mr. Remington announced his decision to remain in Colorado permanently, having purchased a substantial property outside town, a small ranch with a comfortable house, good water, and proximity to his mining interests. "It needs work," he told Grace as they rode out to inspect it, "but it has potential, room to breathe, to build something new." Grace, surveying the rolling meadows backed by distant mountains, felt a sense of rightness she had never experienced in Boston. "It's beautiful, Father. I think Mother would have approved. She always did enjoy a good view." Mr. Remington's expression softened with memory. "Grace, there's something I want to discuss with you about Owen Nighthawk." Grace tensed slightly. Despite her father's apparently changed attitude, she feared he might still harbor reservations about the man who had captured her heart. "What about him?" "I've offered him a position," Mr. Remington said, surprising her. "Overseeing security for the mining operations and helping develop this property. He has knowledge of the land, connections throughout the territory, skills that would be invaluable. And, did he accept?" Mr. Remington smiled. "He said his decision would depend entirely on yours." Grace's breath caught. "Mine. He wouldn't presume to remain in Durango, working closely with our family without your explicit approval." Her father's eyes twinkled. "I believe his exact words were, 'I won't stay where I'm not wanted, and I won't leave if I'm needed.'" Tears welled in Grace's eyes, so like Owen, direct, honorable, placing her happiness above his own desires. "Where is he now?" "In town, I believe. Mentioned something about supplies." Mr. Remington reached over to pat her hand. "You know, when your mother first introduced me to her parents, they thought me entirely unsuitable. A merchant's son with ambitious plans but little to recommend me beyond determination and devotion to their daughter. What changed their minds? your mother's happiness. They saw how she bloomed with me, despite or perhaps because of the challenges we faced together. He gazed out over the property. I see that same bloom in you since your return, Grace, not despite your ordeal, but because of how you faced it and who you faced it with. Grace leaned over to kiss her father's cheek. Thank you for understanding. I'm learning, he replied with a rueful smile. Now, shall we return to town? I believe you have a conversation to initiate. Grace found Owen at the livery stable, checking Renegade's shoes before a planned ride into the hills. When he saw her approaching, he straightened, removing his hat in a gesture that was both respectful and endearingly awkward. Miss Remington, he greeted her, the formality at odds with the warmth in his eyes. I believe we're well past such formalities, Owen, Grace replied, moving closer. Especially since my father tells me he's offered you a position. Owen nodded, his expression cautious. He did, a generous one. And you made your acceptance contingent on my approval. It seemed the honorable course. Owen set his hat on a nearby post. Grace, these past weeks have meant everything to me, but I won't impose my presence if it makes your new life here uncomfortable. Grace stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. And if I said I couldn't imagine my new life without you in it, that every day we've spent apart in Durango has felt incomplete, hope flickered in Owen's eyes. I'd say your father's job offer just became a lot more appealing. Just the job? Grace asked softly. Owen's hand came up to touch her cheek, his calloused palm gentle against her skin. No, he admitted. Not just the job, never just that. Good. Grace smiled up at him. Because I have conditions of my own regarding your employment with my father. Oh, a hint of amusement touched Owen's lips. What conditions? That you'll consider it temporary, a stepping stone to partnership. Owen's brow furrowed slightly. Partnership? In all things, Grace clarified, her heart pounding. My father's new ranch needs more than an employee, Owen. It needs a family to grow with it, to build a future there. Understanding dawned in Owen's eyes, followed by a joy so pure it transformed his face. Grace Remington, are you proposing to me? Someone needs to be brave enough to take that step, she replied, laughter bubbling up through her tears. And you did teach me to be brave. Owen pulled her into his arms, uncaring of who might see them in the public stable yard. Yes, he whispered against her hair. Yes to employment, to partnership, to a future, to everything, as long as it's with you. Grace tilted her face up to his, and their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of the life stretching before them, a life neither could have imagined before fate and courage brought them together. 1 year later, Grace stood on the porch of the ranch house, their home now, expanded and improved through months of shared labor. Inside, her father entertained guests from Durango, celebrating both his successful mining venture and the imminent arrival of his first grandchild. Owen appeared from the barn, his easy stride and relaxed shoulders so different from the vigilant, wary man who had entered Blackstone's ranch that fateful night. When he spotted Grace watching him, his face lit with a smile that still made her heart race. Admiring the view, he asked as he joined her on the porch, slipping an arm around her expanding waistline. Always. Grace leaned into his embrace. Father's regaling everyone with the story of how we met. I believe it grows more dramatic with each telling. Owen chuckled. By the time our child is old enough to understand it, I expect I'll have single-handedly fought off 20 outlaws to rescue you. Wasn't far from the truth, Grace reminded him, turning in his arms to face him. You did break the locks and carry me to freedom. Best decision I ever made. Owen placed a gentle hand on her stomach, feeling the baby shift beneath his palm. Though asking you to marry me runs a close second. "I believe I proposed to you, Mr. Nighthawk," Grace corrected with a smile, a technicality, Mrs. Nighthawk. Owen kissed her softly. "Either way, I count myself the luckiest man in Colorado territory." From inside the house came the sound of laughter and conversation, her father's voice, their friends from town, Sarah and Daniel, who had traveled from their homestead for the celebration. The community they had built together, the life they had forged from the ashes of danger and betrayal. Grace looked up into the eyes of the man who had saved her in more ways than he would ever know, the cowboy who had broken her chains and, in doing so, freed them both to find a love neither had been looking for but both had desperately needed. "Not luck," she said softly. "Courage. Yours that night in Blackstone's basement. Mine when I decided to trust you. Ours every day since as we build this life together." Owen's arms tightened around her, gentle with her changing body but secure as always. "To courage, then," he whispered against her lips. "And to freedom, the kind that comes not from breaking locks, but from finding where you truly belong." As the sun set behind the Colorado mountains, painting their land in gold and amber, Grace knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not in the society ballrooms of Boston or the arranged marriage her father had once envisioned, but here, in the wild frontier, with a man whose quiet strength and unwavering heart had become the foundation of her happiness. The chains that had once bound her wrists had led, through a path neither could have foreseen, to the unbreakable bonds of love that would sustain them through all the years to come.